The millionaire divorced his barren wife. 4 years later, he sees her with his twins. Welcome to Mr. Carter Stories. Where are you watching from? Comment your country below. We'd love to know where our amazing viewers are from. If you love intense billionaire romance, shocking betrayals, and emotional twists that keep you hooked till the last moment, you're in the right place. Which part of our stories do you love the most? The heartbreak, the revenge, the passionate reunions? Tell us in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and follow Mr. Carter Stories for more gripping tales. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Mr. Carter Stories, where love, pain, and redemption collide, on fire. The sound of shuffling papers echoed in the grand, marble-floored study of the Blackwood mansion. The scent of aged whiskey lingered in the air, mixing with the sharp ink of freshly printed divorce papers. Adrian Blackwood stood tall and unmoving, his dark gaze locked onto the woman who had once meant everything to him. But now that love was buried beneath layers of disappointment, resentment, and an aching void that only an heir could fill. Across from him, Ella Monroe sat in stunned silence. Her delicate hands trembled as she clutched the divorce papers he had just slid across the polished mahogany desk. Sign them. 2 words, cold, merciless. A death sentence to the marriage she had fought so hard to hold on to. Ella's throat was dry, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, anything, but the lump in her throat suffocated her voice. She looked up, her soft, honey-brown eyes searching his face, hoping, praying to see a trace of the man she had fallen in love with. But the Adrian Blackwood standing before her was a stranger. Adrian, her voice cracked as she whispered his name. His expression remained unreadable, unmoved. Please, tell me this is a mistake. A bitter chuckle escaped his lips as he stepped back, his fingers casually unbuttoning the cuffs of his expensive tailored suit. A mistake, he repeated mockingly. His eyes, once filled with warmth for her, were now frozen over with disdain. The only mistake I made was believing you could give me an heir. Ella's entire world came crashing down around her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she fought them back, refusing to break in front of him. Not like this. I may not be able to give you a child, but I am still your wife, she cried, desperation lacing her every word. Adrian's jaw clenched. A barren woman is worthless to me, Ella. The words slashed through her like a knife, leaving her breathless. A strangled sob left her lips as she clutched her stomach, a subconscious act, one that neither of them understood in that moment. If only she had known. If only she had realized that life was already growing inside her. But fate was cruel, and Adrian Blackwood was even crueler. You promised to love me in sickness and in health, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Adrian turned away, pouring himself a glass of whiskey, his back now facing her. That was before I realized you were incapable of giving me what I need. Ella's body trembled. She felt nauseous, but she wasn't sure if it was from heartbreak or the unexplainable weakness creeping into her limbs. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair, her nails digging into the wood as she forced herself to stay upright. So that's it? She asked, her voice hollow. You're throwing me away? Adrian took a slow sip of his drink before placing the glass down with a finality that made her stomach sink. You were never meant to be a Blackwood, Ella. It felt like the floor beneath her had crumbled. Her fingers curled into fists, nails digging into her palms so hard that she barely noticed the pain. And what about love? She asked, her voice breaking. Did that mean nothing to you? Adrian's lips curled into something that almost resembled a smirk, but there was no humor in it. Love doesn't give me an heir, Ella. That was it. That was the moment she realized the man she had loved, with every fiber of her being, no longer existed. Her heart cracked, the pieces falling into a pit of unforgivable betrayal. The silence stretched between them, suffocating and unbearable. Adrian grabbed his coat, his movements brisk, efficient, detached. Pack your things, he ordered, walking past her toward the door. You have until morning to leave. Ella felt her breath hitch. Leave, she whispered, her fingers tightening around the armrest. But this is my home. Adrian paused at the doorway, but he didn't turn back. It never was. And with that, he left. Just like that. As if their years together had meant nothing. Ella sat frozen, the deafening sound of his footsteps fading into the night. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. She didn't know when she had collapsed onto the floor, her trembling fingers gripping her stomach as waves of pain and nausea rolled over her. The divorce papers lay beside her, mocking her. The ink on the page was crisp and final, just like Adrian's heartless decision. The whispers started then, soft at first, then growing louder. The sound of laughter, sharp and cruel, filled the empty halls. Poor thing, he threw her away like garbage. Can you blame him? A wife who can't bear children is nothing but a liability. She'll be forgotten in no time. Adrian deserves better. The voices swirled around her, suffocating her, mocking her pain. Ella apretó su mandíbula, dispuesta a no gritar. She had given Adrian everything, her love, her loyalty, her devotion, only to be tossed aside like she was nothing. A fresh wave of dizziness hit her, and the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the golden chandelier above, spinning out of focus. But fate had a different plan for her, because hidden beneath the devastation, in the depths of her shattered soul, a spark of life was growing inside her, a secret neither of them knew yet, a secret that, 4 years later, would change everything. The grand ballroom of the Blackwood Empire Hotel glittered under the soft glow of a massive crystal chandelier. It was the kind of event where power and prestige dictated the atmosphere, where the air buzzed with champagne toasts, hushed business deals, and whispered scandals. Adrian Blackwood stood at the center of it all, as he always did. Dressed in an immaculately tailored black suit, his presence alone commanded attention. Guests gravitated toward him, offering pleasantries, making alliances, even vying for his favor. But tonight, none of it mattered. He had it all, except the one thing he truly wanted: an heir. His engagement with Vanessa Sterling had ended in betrayal, a deception so cruel it had cost him both trust and time. And now, 4 years after discarding his past, his future felt emptier than ever. Adrian lifted a glass of whiskey to his lips, letting the burn settle deep in his chest. His mind drifted back, as it often did, to her, Ella Monroe, his ex-wife, his greatest mistake. He had convinced himself he had moved on, that his decision to cast her aside had been logical, that a woman incapable of giving him an heir had no place by his side. And yet, why did she still haunt him in the quiet moments? Why did he still remember the way her honey-brown eyes had glistened with betrayal the night he'd handed her the divorce papers? Why did he sometimes wake in the middle of the night, his pulse racing, his subconscious whispering that he had destroyed the only woman who ever truly loved him? Adrian exhaled sharply, pushing the thought aside. Regret was a useless emotion. The live orchestra shifted to a softer melody, and as he scanned the room out of habit, his gaze landed on a figure that made his entire body go rigid. A woman stood across the ballroom, poised yet unknowingly devastating. His breath hitched. Ella. For a brief, disorienting moment, he thought he was imagining her, a cruel trick of his mind. But no, she was real. Her golden brown hair was swept into an elegant updo, loose strands framing a face that had only grown more breathtaking over the years. The once soft, trusting expression he remembered was now replaced by an air of quiet strength, of unshakable confidence. She was no longer the broken woman he had left behind. She was a woman who had rebuilt herself. A sudden, inexplicable panic gripped his chest. She wasn't alone. 2 little boys, identical twins, stood beside her, clinging to the fabric of her dress. Adrian's world tilted on its axis. The sounds of the gala faded. The people, the music, the lights, it all blurred into insignificance. Because those boys, they had his hair, his eyes, his face. One of them turned his head and let out a carefree, ringing laugh, a laugh Adrian knew far too well, a laugh that sounded exactly like his own childhood recordings. His glass slipped from his fingers, crashing onto the marble floor, but he didn't hear it. The room erupted in murmurs. Isn't that Adrian's ex-wife? Good God, those boys, they look just like him. Did she have his children? Adrian's mind raced, but the calculations weren't adding up. No, impossible. Ella had been barren. The doctors had told him so. He had divorced her because she couldn't give him children. Hadn't he? His pulse thundered. His feet felt locked in place, but every muscle in his body burned to move. Toward her, toward them, toward the truth that threatened to shatter everything he thought he knew. Ella's expression shifted, as if she had just felt the weight of his gaze. She turned, and for the first time in 4 years, their eyes met. For a split second, everything stopped. The woman he had discarded, the woman he had left in pieces, now stood before him whole, unbreakable, and standing beside her were the twins who should have been his everything. Adrian's blood turned to ice. Had he made the worst mistake of his life? Adrian barely registered the gasps and murmurs around him as he strode across the ballroom, his focus locked on her. The crowd instinctively parted, sensing the storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. His mind was a battlefield of rage, confusion, and something terrifyingly close to regret. Ella, the woman he had discarded like nothing. The woman now standing before him, with his sons, his muscles coiled with tension, every step toward her an agonizing reminder of his past mistakes. Ella Monroe turned before he even reached her, as if she had sensed him coming. Their eyes met, a collision of fire and ice. She was breathtaking, unshaken. If she was affected by his presence, she hid it perfectly. The woman he had left behind had been soft, devoted, desperate for his love. This woman, she radiated independence, strength, a quiet fury that dared him to step closer. "We need to talk." His voice was low, sharp, a demand. Ella's expression didn't waver. "There's nothing to talk about, Mr. Blackwood." Mr. Blackwood, not Adrian. The cold formality of it slammed into him like a blow. His jaw tightened, his fists curled, his rage ignited. "Don't do this, Ella." His voice was steel. "I want answers, and I will get them." She lifted her chin, her honey-brown eyes burning with defiance. "You lost the right to ask anything the day you threw me away." The venom in her words cut deep. Adrian took another step forward, but Ella moved protectively in front of the boys. Something in his chest twisted. She was shielding them. From him. "Get away from my children." Her voice was lethal. His children. His stomach clenched. His world tilted. "You think you can keep them from me?" His voice was a low growl. Ella's lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "I don't think, Adrian. I know." The challenge was clear. The woman he had once dismissed as weak now stood before him, daring him to fight. And for the first time in his ruthless, calculated life, Adrian Blackwood had no idea what to do. But one thing was certain. He wasn't letting go this time. "I will find out the truth, Ella." His voice was dangerously quiet. "Whether you like it or not." A flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. But she didn't back down. She simply lifted her hand, took her son's tiny palms in hers, and turned away, leaving Adrian standing in the middle of the gala, for the first time in his life, completely powerless. Adrian Blackwood was not a man who tolerated uncertainty, and right now his world was unraveling with questions that had no answers. The moment Ella had walked away with the twins, something inside him had snapped. He needed the truth, all of it. So he did what he did best. He took control. The investigation begins within hours. Adrian had his best team of investigators digging into every aspect of Ella Monroe's life since the divorce. They worked fast, efficiently, ruthlessly. And when the report landed on his desk 3 days later, he wasn't sure whether to breathe or break. Every page was a dagger to his chest. Ella had left the city pregnant. Pregnant. Adrian clenched his fists so tightly the paper nearly tore. She had been carrying his children when he discarded her. His own flesh and blood had been growing inside her when he had called her barren, worthless. He exhaled sharply, his pulse hammering in his ears. The reports continued. She had no support. She had built her life from nothing. She had given birth alone. Adrian stared at the words, trying to process the hell she had gone through. While he had been drowning in wealth and luxury, she had been surviving, fighting, She had been raising his sons in secrecy. And the final page? The DNA results. His hands shook as he read them. 99.9% match. Paternity confirmed. The truth was undeniable. The twins were his sons. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, his mind a storm of emotions he didn't recognize. Guilt, rage, regret. He had destroyed his own family. He had thrown away the only woman who had ever truly loved him. And now, he was going to get them back, at any cost. Adrian Blackwood had made many mistakes in his life, but none haunted him like losing Ella and his sons. Now that he knew the truth, there was only one course of action. He would get them back, at any cost. And Adrian Blackwood never lost. First move, the school encounter. The first time Adrian saw the twins up close, his heart nearly stopped. He waited outside their elite private school, leaning against his sleek black Aston Martin, ignoring the stares from teachers and parents. He knew the exact moment the twins stepped out of the building. They were identical versions of himself at that age. Dark hair, golden eyes, the same confident, mischievous energy he had once possessed. A fierce, possessive pride swelled in his chest. These were his sons. When the boys noticed him, they froze, curious, wary. One of them, the bolder twin, took a step forward. "Who are you?" the boy asked, tilting his head. Adrian crouched to their level, his voice smooth, controlled. "I'm Adrian. I'm a friend of your mother's." The quieter twin frowned. "Mommy doesn't talk about friends." Adrian smiled, though it felt foreign. "Maybe she should." Before he could say more, a sharp, furious voice sliced through the moment. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Adrian barely had time to react before Ella stormed toward them, her eyes blazing. She pulled the boys behind her body an unmistakable shield between them. "Stay away from my children, Adrian." Adrian straightened, his expression unreadable. "Our children, Ella." Her breath hitched, but her glare didn't waver. "You don't get to say that. Not after what you did." His jaw tightened. He wasn't backing down. "This isn't over." His voice was quiet, lethal. Ella scoffed. It was over 4 years ago. But Adrian Blackwood never accepted defeat. Second move, buying her company. 2 days later, Adrian closed the biggest deal of his life. He didn't need another business, but he needed her. So he bought the fashion label she worked for. Ella was trapped. The moment she entered the office that morning, she found Adrian sitting in the CEO's chair, her face drained of color. "You've got to be kidding me." Adrian smirked, leaning back. "Welcome to my company, Miss Monroe." She slammed her bag onto the desk. "You think you can buy your way into my life?" He shrugged. "It worked, didn't it?" Her hands clenched into fists. "I quit." Adrian's smile didn't falter. "You could, but who else would pay you what I do? Who else would give you the flexibility to be with our sons?" Her nostrils flared. "You don't get to use them against me." Adrian leaned forward, his golden eyes burning into hers. "I will do whatever it takes to be in their lives. In yours." Él exhaló con temblor, furia y algo más titilando en su mirada. She hated him, but he wasn't letting her walk away this time. Third move, eliminating the competition. Adrian had never cared about Ella's love life before, because he had believed she was beneath him. Now, the thought of any other man near her made his blood boil. So he made sure no man dared approach her. A few strategic phone calls, a few well-placed threats. Anyone who thought about dating Ella Monroe found themselves out of a job, out of a contract, out of luck. She was his, even if she didn't realize it yet. The final confrontation days later, Ella stormed into his office, furious. "You think you can manipulate your way back into my life? Into our sons' lives?" She spat. Adrian stood, calm, confident. "I'm not manipulating Ella. I'm taking back what's mine." She let out a bitter laugh. "You threw me away. You don't get to claim me now." His eyes darkened. "I always get what I want." Ella stepped closer, defiant. "And what is it that you want, Adrian?" His gaze burned into hers. "I want my family back." Her breath caught. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. And Adrian knew this was only the beginning. Noah and Liam were not ordinary children. At just 4 years old, they were sharp, observant, too smart for their own good. And they had noticed something. A man. A man who had suddenly begun appearing everywhere. At their school, near their home, even at their mother's office. The man with dark hair, golden eyes, the same as theirs. At first it was just curiosity, but soon it became suspicion. The observations begin. Liam, the quieter of the two, nudged his brother one evening while they played in the living room. "Noah," he whispered, "why is that man always looking at mommy like that?" Noah frowned. "Like what?" Liam chewed his lip, thinking. Like he's sad and scared, but also like he wants to hug her. Noah turned to their mother, who was in the kitchen, looking out the window, her hands gripping the counter a little too tightly, and outside, standing near his parked car, was him. Noah's small fists clenched. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think we should find out." The question that changed everything. The next afternoon, as Ella picked them up from school, Adrian was already waiting. This time, the twins didn't hesitate. They walked straight up to him. Ella's breath caught in her throat. "Noah! Liam! Come back here!" she called, but they ignored her. Noah stood directly in front of Adrian, his little arms crossed. Golden eyes met golden eyes. A mirror. Ella's stomach twisted. Then Noah asked, his voice steady, unafraid, "Are you our dad?" Silence. A deafening, painful silence. Ella's heart pounded. She had known this moment would come one day, but not like this. Not in the middle of a sidewalk, with Adrian looking at them like they were his entire world. She turned, ready to deflect, to pull them away. But then she saw it, a crack in Adrian's armor. For the first time, Adrian Blackwood, the cold-hearted billionaire, the ruthless businessman, the man who never showed weakness, looked vulnerable. He knelt before them, his hands trembling slightly as he met their gaze. And when he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, cracked, raw. "Yes." The boys didn't move. They just stared. "And I will do anything," Adrian continued, "to prove I deserve you." Ella's breath hitched. Noah blinked. Liam tilted his head. And then, in the smallest voice, Liam asked, "Why did you leave?" Ella flinched. Adrian closed his eyes, pain flashing across his face. When he opened them again, they were red-rimmed, filled with something Ella had never thought she'd see in him. Regret. "Because I made the worst mistake of my life," he admitted, "and I will never stop making it up to you." Noah and Liam exchanged a look. Ella's throat tightened. Was this man truly changing? Or was this just another game? She didn't know. But what scared her most was that a part of her wanted to believe him. And that was dangerous. Very, very dangerous. For the first time in 4 years, Adrian Blackwood felt like he was getting closer to the life he had unknowingly thrown away. Ella had stopped flinching at his presence. The twins had started asking him questions instead of shutting him out. A fragile thread of trust was beginning to form. But then, she returned, and the world Adrian was trying to rebuild came crashing down. The uninvited guest Adrian was in his office, reviewing a proposal, when his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Sir, you have an unexpected visitor." Adrian frowned. "Send them away. I don't have time for—" "It's Vanessa Sterling, sir." His blood ran cold. Vanessa, the woman he once thought he would marry, the woman who had stood beside him, whispering lies into his ear, the woman who had helped destroy his marriage. Adrian's jaw clenched. "Send her in." The door swung open, and there she was, Vanessa Sterling, draped in an elegant black dress, her dark red lips curling into a smirk, as if she still had power over him, as if he was still the blind fool who had believed every word she had once fed him. "Adrian," she purred, stepping forward. "Did you miss me?" He leaned back, his golden eyes cold. "You have exactly 2 minutes to explain why the hell you're here before I have you thrown out." Vanessa laughed. "Oh, darling, you always were impatient." Adrian didn't move, didn't react. But inside, his fury simmered. Because he knew Vanessa never did anything without a reason, And whatever that reason was, it wouldn't be good. The ugly truth. Vanessa strolled toward his desk, taking her time. Then she leaned in, her voice dropping to a taunting whisper. What if I told you, Adrian, that everything you believed about Ella was a lie? His fingers curled into a fist. Careful, Vanessa, she smiled. Oh, but you need to hear this. She tossed a folder onto his desk. Look inside. Adrian didn't want to, but his gut told him he needed to. Slowly he opened the file, and what he saw nearly made him rip the entire office apart. Medical reports, forgery records, proof that the documents he had seen years ago, the ones stating that Ella was barren, were fake. His head snapped up, rage burning through his veins. What the hell is this? Vanessa's smirk grew. The truth, Adrian. The reports you saw, the ones that made you leave Ella? She shrugged. I had them altered. Adrian shot up from his chair, his pulse thundering. You made me believe she couldn't have children. His voice was low, dangerous. Vanessa tilted her head, unfazed. I did what needed to be done. Adrian's vision blurred with fury. He had been played, manipulated. His entire life had been destroyed because of her. You think you can steal my family and walk away, Vanessa? His voice was like ice. Vanessa laughed, stepping closer. You were stupid enough to believe me once. Maybe you still are. Adrian grabbed her wrist, tight enough to make her flinch. I was stupid, yes, but never again. His grip tightened. You stole 4 years from me, from Ella, from my sons. For the first time, Vanessa looked nervous. I wonder, what should I take from you in return? Her eyes widened. Adrian, but he had already pressed a button on his desk. Within seconds, 2 security guards entered. Escort her out, and make sure she never steps foot in this building again. Vanessa struggled as they grabbed her arms. You think this is over? She hissed. You still don't know everything. Adrian's expression was stone. Get out. The doors slammed shut, but Adrian didn't feel victorious. He felt sick. 4 years. 4 years of hatred, anger, regret. And it had all been for nothing. He had abandoned the only woman who had ever truly loved him. He had called her Barren when she had been carrying his children. Adrian sat back down, gripping his head. How the hell was he supposed to fix this? And worse, what else had Vanessa been lying about? Because if there was one thing Adrian knew, Vanessa never walked away without a fight, and she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Ella Monroe had spent years bearing the pain. She had forced herself to forget the nights she had cried herself to sleep, alone, to forget the way Adrian's words had cut her deeper than any knife, to forget the humiliation of watching him walk away without looking back. And yet all it took was one truth, one sickening, gut-wrenching truth, to bring it all crashing back. Adrian hadn't left her because he stopped loving her. He had left because he had been tricked, and suddenly the hate she had clung to for so long felt like a lie. Shattered pieces. Ella sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she read the documents Adrian had sent her. Vanessa had forged everything, the reports, the diagnosis, the entire reason Adrian had called her barren, her vision blurred with tears, her heart twisting with emotions she didn't know how to name. Anger, pain, betrayal, and worst of all, hope. Because if Adrian had never truly wanted to leave her, if he had been just as much a victim, then what did that mean for them now? A knock at the door made her jump, and then she heard it, his voice. Ella, please, open the door. The man in the rain. Ella stood frozen, staring at the door, her breath shallow. She should ignore him. She should tell him to go to hell. But her feet moved before her mind could stop them. With shaking fingers, she unlocked the door and pulled it open. And there he was. Adrian Blackwood stood in the pouring rain, completely drenched. His black suit was soaked, his golden eyes dark with desperation. He looked like a man on the brink of losing everything. And maybe he was. Ella se tragó con fuerza. Adrian! I was blind, he interrupted, his voice raw, hoarse. I was cruel, but I have never stopped loving you. The words hit her like a tidal wave. For years she had dreamed of hearing them, but now that they were here, they terrified her. The billionaire's breakdown. Adrian stepped closer, his wet hair plastered to his forehead. "I believed Vanessa because I was a fool," he whispered. "I believed her because I was desperate for a child. And in doing that," his voice cracked, "I threw away my family." Ella clenched her fists. "You didn't just throw us away, Adrian. You destroyed me." Adrian squeezed his eyes shut, guilt carving lines into his perfect face. "I know. Do you?" Her voice shook. "Do you know what it was like to be abandoned? To raise two children alone with no money, no support, while you were off living your perfect life?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "My life was never perfect without you." Ella laughed bitterly. "Don't lie to me." "I'm not lying." His eyes burned with something dangerous. "Ella, I have spent 4 years regretting every second I spent without you." She sucked in a breath. Adrian took another step forward. "I love you, Ella. I never stopped. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you, if you let me." The words were real. They were everything she had ever wanted to hear. But could she trust them? Could she trust him? A cold wind blew, sending a shiver through her spine. Adrian took off his drenched jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, as if protecting her was still instinct. Ella clutched the fabric, her heart at war. For the first time, she saw the broken man beneath the ruthless billionaire. For the first time, she saw Adrian, not as the man who hurt her, but as the man who had been just as lost as she had. Tears welled in her eyes. Because this was her breaking point, and she didn't know if she could survive it. For the first time in years, Ella felt the walls around her crumble. Adrian's words, his remorse, the man standing in the rain, broken and desperate. It had all begun to shake the foundation of her hate. But just as she started to soften, fate struck again, and this time, it didn't care if she was ready to forgive. A mother's worst nightmare. The day had started like any other. Ella had just finished making lunch when she heard it, the sound that would haunt her forever. "Mommy!" Liam's scream tore through the house like a gunshot. Ella ran, her heart slamming against her ribs. And then she saw it. Noah collapsed on the floor, his small body convulsing, his lips turning blue. "Noah!" "Ella sia rodillo sacudiéndolo." "Baby, look at me!" He gasped, his tiny hands clutching his chest. Terror paralyzed her. Liam was crying. The walls felt like they were closing in. And then, out of nowhere, Adrian. He had just arrived when he saw them. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Blackwood felt true, soul-crushing fear. He scooped Noah into his arms, his voice shaking. "Call the damn ambulance!" Ella fumbled for her phone. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Adrian was already sprinting toward his car. "I'm not waiting." His voice was hoarse, desperate. And then he was gone. Noah in his arms, speeding toward the hospital like a man who had everything to lose. Because this time he did. The breaking point. The hospital was a blur of doctors and white lights. Ella sat in the hallway, her nails digging into her palms. Liam clung to her side, his sobs muffled against her sweater. But Adrian? Adrian paced like a caged animal. His eyes were wild, red-rimmed, tormented. "This is my fault," he whispered, gripping his hair. Ella's head snapped up. "What?" His voice cracked. "I wasn't there for him. For you. Maybe if I had been—" "Stop." Ella's voice wavered, but she grabbed his wrist. "Don't do this now." Adrian looked at her, truly looked at her. And for the first time, Ella saw it. The ruthless, invincible billionaire. Breaking. His hands were shaking. His breasts were shallow. And then he did something she never thought she'd see. Adrian Blackwood sank to his knees. His head dropped. His fingers laced together. And he whispered the words she never imagined would leave his lips. "Please, God, don't take my son away." The moment shattered her. This wasn't the man who had walked away from her years ago. This was a man who had been brought to his knees by love, by regret, by fear. Ella couldn't breathe, because in that moment, she knew. Adrian had changed. The moment that changed everything. Hours later, the doctor finally emerged. Ella sprang to her feet. "Doctor, is he?" "He's stable," the doctor assured her, "but he needs immediate surgery. We caught it just in time." Ella's legs nearly gave out. Adrian caught her before she fell. "Thank you," he rasped, his grip tightening around her. "Thank you." The doctor nodded. "We need parental consent to proceed." Adrian's voice was strong, unwavering. "Do whatever it takes to save my son." A father's redemption hours passed. Each second felt like a lifetime. Adrian didn't move from his chair outside the operating room. He didn't speak, didn't blink. Ella had never seen him like this. But when the door finally opened, when the surgeon walked out with a nod, Adrian exhaled for the first time in hours. Noah was going to be okay. And when they finally let him into the room, Adrian's heart broke all over again, because his son, his tiny brave son, was awake. And the first thing Noah did when he saw him, he whispered, "Daddy?" Adrian shattered. He crushed Noah into his arms, his breath hitching, his throat closing. "Yeah, buddy." His voice was barely there. "Daddy's here." And Ella, watching it all, felt something inside her finally give in, because Adrian had proven it, not through words, not through money, but through love. And this time she believed him. The days after Noah's surgery were a blur of healing and quiet moments. For the first time, Adrian Blackwood wasn't buried in business deals or stock markets. Instead, he spent his days at the hospital, learning his son's favorite cartoons, holding their hands through every injection, and carrying them when they were too tired to walk. And Ella? Ella watched in silence, watched as the man she had hated for so long slowly became the father her sons deserved. And maybe, just maybe, the man she had once loved. But forgiveness wasn't easy. And love was even harder. The invitation one evening, as the twins finally drifted to sleep, Adrian approached her. His eyes were softer now, less guarded. "I want to show you something," he said quietly. Ella hesitated, but then Noah stirred in his bed, his tiny fingers reaching for Adrian's hand in his sleep. And she knew. This wasn't the Adrian who had broken her before, so she nodded. "Okay." The return to the mansion. When Ella stepped out of the car, her heart stopped. The mansion. The very place where her world had fallen apart. The place he had thrown her away like she meant nothing. Her fingers curled into fists. "Why did you bring me here?" Adrian turned to her. "Because this time I want to rewrite the ending." And then she noticed it. The once cold, lifeless house was lit up with warm golden lights. The front steps were lined with roses. And beyond the open doors, a future waiting to be rewritten. A proposal that changed everything. Ella turned, her breath hitching. Adrian was on one knee, not in arrogance, not in desperation, but in humility. "Marry me again, Ella," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Her heart stopped. Adrian swallowed hard. "I was a fool once. I let go of the most precious thing in my life because of my own blindness." His golden eyes burned into hers. "But I swear to you, Ella, I will spend every day proving that I am the man you and our sons deserve." A tear slipped down her cheek, and then a shout. "Say yes, Mommy," Ella gasped, turning to find Noah and Liam peeking from behind the doorway, grinning ear to ear. Her hands trembled. Could she trust him? Could she risk it all again? Then Adrian did something that shattered every last wall around her heart. He turned to the twins, his voice breaking. "I love your mommy," Noah beamed. "We know, Daddy," Liam giggled. "Mommy, you're taking too long." Ella laughed through her tears, and this time she whispered, "Yes, a family finally whole." Adrian swept her into his arms, kissing her with the kind of love that had taken 4 years to find its way back. The twins cheered, and in that moment, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and the warmth of a love reborn, they became a family again, not broken, not scarred by the past, but whole, forever.